The wind that raced across the high plains that night carried more than dust. It carried warning. It carried fear. It carried the scent of rain struggling to fall from a sky too cold to let it. And on the outskirts of the Red Mesa country, where the horizon looked like broken stone teeth biting into the clouds, a lone rancher named Caleb Hunter rode home with only his horse for company and the weight of another hard day dragging behind him. Caleb was not a large man, nor was he the sort who filled a room with his voice or his stories. He was quiet, steady, weather-worn, and honest. A man who preferred the rhythm of work to the noise of towns. A man who had learned the hard way that the world could take everything from you and not leave so much as an echo behind. He lived alone on the Hunter Ranch, a place barely held together by hope, stubbornness, and his two calloused hands. His family had once run it together, his father, his mother, his older brother, but life had stripped all three from the land. Now it belonged to him alone. That night the moon was pale, thin as a blade, and struggling to keep its place behind drifting clouds. The sound reached him first soft, strained, like a whimper carried on the wind. His horse lifted its head, ears turning sharply. Caleb slowed. "Easy," he murmured, scanning the dark dot. It came again. A low cry, weak, desperate. He nudged his horse toward a cluster of cedar trees crouched against a rocky slope. At first, he saw nothing but the shifting shadows of the branches, the restless way the wind moved them. Then movement. Large movement. Something hunched on the ground. Something big. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. This was Apache territory, and Caleb knew better than to move like a threat. The stories told in towns were loud with fear. But Caleb had always believed most men were dangerous only when cornered, and most tribes only when crossed. But as he stepped closer, he realized quickly that these were not warriors. Two enormous figures sat slumped against the rocks, women, unmistakably so, and both in terrible shape. He had never seen Apache women so tall, nearly a head above him even while sitting. Their shoulders were broad, strong as boulders shaped by time. Their braids hung long and heavy, dark hair matted with dirt and blood. Their dresses, woven buckskin adorned with beadwork, were torn and soaked from the cold. Sweat of fever. One was barely conscious. The other lifted her head with immense effort, eyes sharp but clouded with pain. Her voice cracked. "Stay back." "White man." Caleb raised both hands. "I'm not here to harm you." The taller sister tried to stand, but her leg buckled, and she fell back with a choked groan. Her breath came fast, shallow, and her hands trembled from weakness rather than fear. Caleb crouched slowly, studying the wound on her thigh. A deep gash, swollen and angry. Infection had already settled in. The younger sister, still huge by his standards, was burning with fever, her skin flushed, breath rattling loudly. "You both need help," he said quietly. The older sister glared, her voice a broken whisper. "We need our people." "You won't make it through the night like this," Caleb warned. "Storm's coming. Temperatures will drop." A sudden gust cut through the clearing, drawing a pained shiver from both women. Even through their size and strength, their bodies were failing them. They had clearly been out here too long, too wounded, too cold, too alone. The older sister spoke again, though her voice was fading. "Go, leave us." Caleb shook his head. "Not happening. Apache or not, giant or not, strangers or not, he wasn't the sort of man who rode away from suffering. He could no more abandon these women than he could stop breathing. Something in him, something good, stubborn, and deeply human, would not allow it. He gathered his courage, stepped closer, and slid his arm beneath the older sister's. She tried to shove him away, but her strength was gone. Her hand merely slapped weakly against his shoulder, then dropped. "Easy," he murmured. "Let me help." She was impossibly heavy, far too large for him to carry normally, so he improvised, dragging, lifting, supporting her weight a little at a time across the frozen earth. His back felt like it was being split in two. Sweat stung his eyes despite the cold. When she was finally secured over his horse, slumped but stable, he turned back for the younger sister. She was delirious by then, drifting in and out of consciousness. The fever burned so hot her skin steamed faintly in the night air. Caleb whispered, "Hang on. I've got you." He carried her in his arms, straining, stumbling, refusing to stop until he lifted her up beside her sister. The horse groaned under the double weight but held steady by the time Caleb mounted and took the reins. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall, soft but relentless. He kicked his horse into motion. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. The night grew colder, the wind sharper, and the snow thicker. More than once, Caleb feared the sisters would slip into darkness entirely. He kept talking to them, nonsense words, soft promises, anything that might tether them to consciousness. "We're almost there," he said again and again. Even when it wasn't true, when the ranch finally came into view, a lonely shape against the storm, Caleb nearly wept with relief. He got the sisters inside, built up the fire, heated water, cleaned wounds, packed herbs, and forced the feverish sister to drink broth spoonful by spoonful. They were so big he had to use nearly all the spare blankets he owned. All night he worked quietly, tirelessly. The way a man works when he refuses to lose another life under his roof. The storm raged. Outside, the two giant sisters breathed in ragged, painful gasps inside, and Caleb, exhausted but unyielding, kept watch, never imagining that his simple act of humanity was about to bring 700 armed warriors to his door. Dawn crept slowly across the Hunter Ranch, touching the windows with a pale glow long before it reached the mountains. Caleb had not slept. He remained slumped in his chair beside the fireplace, head tilted forward, eyes half closed, the fatigue of the night weighing on him like stones. But each time he drifted, the sound of one sister's strained breathing or the other's soft, restless shifting snapped him awake again. He wasn't a doctor, wasn't a healer, wasn't anything special. But he had done absolutely everything a man could do. Cleaned wounds, cooled fevers, offered warmth and broth and quiet reassurance. The only thing left was hope. And the will of the two giant women, whose lives now lay in his hands, as the first true rays of morning light finally pierced the window. Something shifted in the room, a low groan not of pain, but of awareness. Caleb sat upright instantly. The older sister's eyes fluttered open, even half-conscious. They were striking, sharp, dark, assessing. The eyes of a warrior who had never known fear until now. She lay on the long bunk Caleb had built years ago, one meant for his brother, who had always been the bigger of the two. Yet even that sturdy bed creaked beneath her immense weight. She stared at the ceiling for several seconds, breathing slow and deliberate, as though cataloging every sensation of her body. Then, with effort, she turned her head. Her gaze locked on Caleb. For a moment, neither spoke. It was not a silence built from hostility, but from the strange and unexpected intimacy of survival. He had seen her wounded, unconscious, helpless in a way warriors were never meant to be. And she saw him now weary, unshaven, and exhausted by a night spent saving strangers. "You." Her voice rasped like sand over stone. "You brought us here." Caleb nodded. "Found you both near the cedars. You were hurt, sick." The words seemed to hang between them. She blinked slowly, trying to reorient herself. "What? What did you do to my leg?" "Cleaned and stitched it," Caleb answered. "The infection was getting bad. You'll need rest, but you'll keep the leg." She exhaled, half relief, half disbelief. Her fingers brushed the bandaged thigh, testing, confirming. Then her gaze slid past him. My sister? Caleb followed her eyes. On a second bed, one he dragged next to the fire, the younger woman lay sweating but breathing easier, her fever broken. Her enormous frame barely fit the makeshift bedding he'd arranged from blankets, coats, and whatever else he could find. She's improving, Caleb said. Fever broke a couple hours ago. The older sister's throat tightened. She tried to push herself up, but the pain stabbed through her leg like fire. She winced hard. Take it slow, Caleb urged, rising to steady her. You lost a lot of strength. She stared at him as he helped adjust her position. Her expression was puzzled, not in a suspicious way, but in a way that suggested she could not fathom why a man like him would bother helping someone like her. You do not fear us? She asked. Caleb shrugged lightly. Should I? Her brows lifted, surprised. We are Apache. We are warriors of the Red Mesa people. You're also people who needed help, Caleb said simply. She studied him as if trying to determine whether that was bravery, ignorance, or some rare kind of foolish kindness. My name is Tayan, she said at last, her voice gaining strength. And that is my younger sister, Nita. Caleb inclined his head. Caleb Hunter. Tayan eyed him carefully. Caleb, your people and mine are not at peace. No, he admitted, but that's never stopped me from doing what's right. Tayan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something softened in her features. She looked again at Nita, the worry seeping back into her posture. Nita will want to stand when she wakes, she murmured. She is stubborn. She will try. Let her, Caleb said. She'll fall right back down. Tayan huffed a faint, amused breath. You speak truth. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt warm, companionable, even. After several moments, Tayan asked, How did you carry us? Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Wasn't easy. Nearly crushed my horse. But you were both freezing. If I'd left you there... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Tayan single quotes as eyes lowered. Gratitude had never been something she expected to owe a white rancher. Yet there it was, sitting heavy in her chest. You saved us, she whispered. You saved my family. Caleb shook his head. I just did what anyone would do. No, Tayan said firmly. Not anyone? Before he could answer, Nita stirred with a hoarse whimper. Tayan tried to rise again, but Caleb steadied her with a gentle hand. I'll check on her. He approached the younger sister cautiously. Even in her weakened state, she was enormous, almost Amazonian in her height and build. Her fever had left her drenched in sweat, her breaths shallow but steady. As Caleb bent to adjust her blankets, Nita's eyes cracked open, deep black, unfocused, but aware. Her voice came out slurred. Sister? I'm here, Tayan called softly from the bed. We are safe. Nita's gaze drifted to Caleb. Her pupils sharpened slightly, and confusion flickered across her features. White man. Helped. Tayan answered before Caleb could speak. Yes, he carried us from the storm. He saved your life. Nita blinked slowly, absorbing the words. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to reconcile the idea with the reality of the man before her. Then so faint he almost missed it, she whispered. Thank you. Caleb offered a gentle smile. Rest. That's all the thanks I need. But Tayan was still watching him, studying him with an intensity he could feel across the room. Finally she asked the question that had been building in her mind. Since sunrise, do you know what will happen when our people find out where we are? Caleb paused. He hadn't thought that far ahead. His only priority had been keeping the sisters alive. But Tayan's expression said everything her people would come for them. They would come in numbers. They would come prepared for the worst, and they would find a white man alone with two of their Wounded women died before he could answer. Tayan spoke the truth that would alter his life forever. My people will think you captured us. The weight of it settled heavily in Caleb's chest, and then Tayan added, voice low and certain, 700 warriors will come. The sun had barely risen when the plains began to tremble. Caleb had been outside only long enough to fetch water from the well and check the animals when he felt it a low, rhythmic vibration running through the earth. Faint at first, but unmistakably growing. His horse lifted its head sharply, ears swiveling toward the horizon. The cattle bunched up against the fence, restless and uncertain. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Caleb straightened slowly, the water pail dangling forgotten from his hand. That rhythm. He knew it wasn't thunder. It was hooves. Many of them. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. The sky was still washed in the pale gold of early morning. Nothing yet appeared through the light haze, but the sound was getting louder, steadier, heavier. A distant war cry split the air. Caleb's blood ran cold. They were coming faster than he expected. He dropped the pail and sprinted back to the cabin, his boots pounding against the packed earth. Inside, Tayan stiffened the moment the door opened, as though she sensed the change in the world outside. What is happening? She demanded. Caleb shouldn't have been surprised that she could read him so easily. Riders, he said breathlessly. A lot of them. Tayan's jaw tightened. She closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her face, not from her leg, but from the reality she had hoped she was wrong about. My people, she whispered. They come for us. Nita, lying beneath her blankets near the fire, opened her eyes grudgingly. Sister? Tayan forced calm into her voice. Our warriors ride. Nita's breathing quickened with a mixture of relief and alarm. They will think? I know, Tayan said. They will think we were taken. Caleb felt a knot of dread twist inside him. He'd acted on instinct, on decency, on the human need to help someone who was suffering. But to a war party, logic and kindness would not matter. White men had taken Apache women before, stolen them, used them, killed them. The tribes had long memories and deeper scars. It doesn't look good, Caleb admitted. I'm a white rancher alone with 2 unconscious women from your tribe. Doesn't take much imagination to guess how that'll be seen. Tayan pushed herself upright despite the pain. We must speak to them before they attack. You're in no condition to walk, let alone face warriors, Caleb argued. Anita, but Tayan cut him off sharply. If we do nothing, you will die. He knew she wasn't exaggerating. 700 armed riders would level his ranch in minutes. He didn't stand a chance. Nita tried to sit up, but her limbs trembled violently. She collapsed back, breath ragged. I cannot. You must not, Tayan insisted, lowering her voice. Your fever could return. Caleb paced once across the small room, then stopped, planting his hands on his hips. Is there any way to signal them? Something to show I didn't harm you? Tayan looked at him with eyes filled with a warrior's hard truth. Only our voices will stop them. The pounding hooves grew louder, the vibrations moving like a living thing through the ground. Caleb stepped to the window. A dark shape was forming in the distance, no longer a blur, but a mass, riders. Lines of them, spreading across the plains like a tide of black and red. He swallowed hard. They're here. Tayan forced herself to her feet. Caleb moved instantly to steady her. You can't. I must, she said firmly, leaning on his arm to keep her balance. My people will not listen to you. They will not see flowers by the window or blankets by the fire. They will see only their fear. Nita pushed herself up on trembling elbows. Sister, stay, Tayan commanded. Live. It was the sort of voice that had led warriors into battle, a tone heavy with authority and expectation. Even weak and injured, she radiated a strength that commanded respect. But standing was one thing. Walking was another. The pain in her leg nearly buckled her. Caleb tightened his hold, offering silent support. "We'll both go," he said. "They need to see you alive." Tayan hesitated. A warrior walking out of a white man's cabin leaning on him for support? To her people, that image alone might spark bloodshed. "You cannot stand alone," Caleb reminded her quietly. "You know that." Tayan's jaw clenched. She hated the weakness, hated the vulnerability, but she hated the thought of Caleb dying because of her more. "Very well," she said. "But do not speak unless I tell you. Wasn't planning to." He grabbed his coat, slung it over her shoulders for warmth. And together they stepped onto the porch. The sight that met them was overwhelming. The plains were filled with riders, 700 at least, stretching far back toward the horizon. Their horses moved in tight formation, eyes wild, nostrils flaring. Warriors wore feathers, war paint, hardened expressions shaped by loss and battle. Their spears caught the rising sun like shards of fire. Drums pounded from the rear, synchronized with the thunder of hooves. It was not a rescue party. It was an army. And it had surrounded his ranch completely. A group of 30 riders broke off from the main formation, galloping toward the cabin. Dust spun behind them as they halted in a semicircle. Their leader dismounted, a towering man with braids wrapped in red cloth, his chest painted in white streaks of mourning. Tayan stiffened. "Chief Atza," she whispered, "the chief of the Red Mesa Apache." He looked at her, then at Caleb, then at the way she leaned on him to stay upright. A deadly silence fell. Atza's voice boomed like a breaking storm. "Explain." Tayan drew breath, but Caleb felt her weight trembling through him. She was weaker than she pretended. Still, she lifted her chin and spoke with the force of a warrior. "We were not taken," she declared. "We were saved." Murmurs rippled through the riders. Some disbelief, some outrage. Atza's jaw flexed. "Saved?" He repeated coldly. Tayan nodded. "This man carried us through the storm. He treated our wounds. Without him, we would be dead." The chief's gaze snapped to Caleb, sharp and assessing. "He touched you?" Atza demanded. Tayan did not flinch. "He saved us." Atza stepped forward, face darkening. "Why would a white rancher risk his life for our women?" Caleb opened his mouth, but Tayan's hand tightened painfully around his arm. She had warned him not to speak, but Atza's eyes burned into him regardless. Around them, hundreds of warriors gripped their weapons tighter. Waiting, judging, ready. And Caleb knew that with a single wrong word, a single wrong movement, the ground would drink blood. The morning sun climbed higher, its light spreading across the plains and glinting off the metal tips of spears. 700 Apache warriors waited in a vast ring around the Hunter Ranch, their horses stamping, snorting, restless with tension. The air itself felt tight, as if the land were holding its breath. At the center of it all stood Caleb, supporting Tayan with one arm, facing the towering presence of Chief Atza. Atza's expression was carved from stone cold, unreadable except for the flare of anger that burned behind his eyes. His war paint, stark white and black across his cheekbones, made him look even more severe. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who commanded nations. "You say the white man saved you," Atza said to Tayan, "yet you lean on him like a captive." Tayan narrowed her eyes. "I lean because I am injured, not because I am owned." Several warriors shifted in their saddles, murmuring. To them, appearances mattered. A woman, especially a warrior of Tayan's status, leaning on a white man was an image that set blood boiling. Caleb felt the tension building like a storm crackling in the clouds. He knew that if this went wrong even for a heartbeat, These men would burn his ranch to the ground and scatter his bones across the plains. Atza stepped closer. Towering over Caleb, his shadow fell across the porch. You. The single word hit like a hammer blow. Caleb forced himself not to take a step back. Fear clawed at him, but he held steady. You took them from where? I didn't take them, Caleb replied carefully. I found them near the cedar grove, half dead from cold and wounds. If I hadn't, silence. Atza raised a hand sharply. Caleb shut his mouth instantly. Tayin angled herself between them, her breath tight with pain. Listen to him, Atza. He speaks truth. The chief did not look at her. You are wounded, fevered. You do not think clearly. Tayin stiffened with offense, but she held her ground. My mind is clear enough to know who carried me through a storm, who stitched my leg, who stayed awake the entire night to keep Nita alive. Atza's jaw hardened. And why, he demanded, turning back to Caleb, would a white man risk his life to help daughters of our people? Caleb answered honestly, because leaving anyone to die in the cold is wrong. A surprised murmur rippled through the nearest warriors. Some laughed harshly. Others frowned, uncertain. Atza's nostrils flared. You expect my people to believe you acted out of kindness? Caleb swallowed. Yes. For the first time, the chief's composure cracked. A flash of emotion, a mixture of disbelief and deep, inherited anger crossed his features. Tayin lifted her voice again. Atza, hear me. We were hunting when outlaws attacked. They chased us into the rocks. We killed many, but more came. Nita was struck down. I was wounded. We escaped but could not outrun the storm. She steadied herself, breathing through the pain. That night would have killed us. He saved us. That is truth. Atza's eyes narrowed. If he saved you, why did he not bring you to the edge of our land? Why take you to his home? Caleb's answer was simple. You wouldn't have found us in time. They needed warmth, fire, water, medicines. If I'd left them outside, even for minutes, one or both would have died. Tayin nodded fiercely. He speaks truth. Atza looked between them, Caleb pale but steady, Tayin trembling but defiant. Something in the chief's gaze softened for the briefest moment, then sharpened again. Words, Atza said darkly, are wind. I trust only proof. He gestured, and one of his warriors rode forward bearing a long wooden staff decorated with eagle feathers and red cloth. Atza took it and planted it firmly in the ground. By the law of our people, he declared, when truth is in dispute, there must be a test of truth. Tayin's face paled. Nita, weak but awake inside the cabin, let out a strained cry. Caleb had no idea what the test of truth was, but the look on Tayin's face told him it wasn't good. Atza pointed the staff at Caleb. You will stand alone in the circle. My warriors will ask questions. They will judge your heart, your words, your courage. Caleb forced his voice steady. And if they judge wrong? Atza's voice was cold as winter stone. Then you die. The words stole the breath from the air. Nita struggled weakly to rise. No, no. He helped. Atza raised a hand, silencing her. If he speaks truth, he lives. If he lies, the earth will drink his blood. Caleb looked at Tayin. Is there any other way? Tayin gripped his arm tightly. This test has taken the lives of many men, even brave ones. She swallowed. But sometimes it has spared those who speak from the heart. Caleb nodded slowly. Then I'll speak the truth. It's all I have. Tayin's voice broke with rare emotion. You saved us. I do not want you to die for it. Atza motioned sharply. Bring him. Warriors dismounted and approached. Caleb stepped forward before they could grab him, showing he had no intention of resisting. They led him into the open clearing at the heart of the enormous circle of riders. The ground vibrated beneath him as hundreds of horses shifted their weight. Tayan watched helplessly from the porch. Gripping the railing with white knuckles, her face twisted with fear and guilt. Nita stared through the cabin window, tears streaming down her cheeks. Caleb stood alone in the center of 700 warriors. Atsa stepped into the circle, raising the staff. "We begin." A warrior rode forward, leaning down to glare into Caleb's face. "Why did you touch our sisters?" Caleb steadied his heartbeat. "To save them." Another warrior spurred his horse closer. "Why bring them to your home?" "They were dying." A third warrior shouted, "Why save people who are not your own?" Caleb's answer came without hesitation. "Because life is life. Doesn't matter whose." Silence rippled outward. Some warriors blinked. Others leaned forward. They were not used to hearing such words. Atsa asked the final question, one that would determine everything. "Would you die for them?" Caleb inhaled slowly, and he answered, his voice raw, simple, true. "I almost did." The wind stopped. The horses quieted. Even the earth seemed to settle. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Tayan whispered, barely audible, "He speaks truth." Atsa lowered the staff. The test of truth was complete, but the chief's judgment had not yet been given. The wind shifted first, softly, subtly, as though the plains themselves leaned in, waiting for a verdict that would determine whether the day would end in blood or in something far more unexpected. Caleb stood alone in the center of the immense circle, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His coat fluttered against his legs in the rising breeze. The eyes of 700 Apache warriors burned into him, judging, dissecting, weighing every breath he took. Tayan clung to the porch railing, her knuckles white, fighting the pain that still racked her injured leg. She looked as if she were willing her body to move, to run to him, to tear him from the center of that deadly circle. But she couldn't. Custom held her in place as firmly as her wound. Inside the cabin, Nita pressed both hands against the window frame, tears streaking her cheeks. Her breath fogging the glass. Chief Atsa stood only a few paces from Caleb, the staff of judgment planted in the earth between them. Its eagle feathers swayed in the breeze, catching the sunlight like shards of gold. Atsa's silence was a blade sharp, cold, painful. Finally, he spoke. "Your answers." The chief's voice boomed across the plains. "We're bold." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Atsa continued, "Boldness is not truth. Boldness is not goodness. Many men speak bravely when death breathes at their neck." Caleb swallowed hard. He held his gaze forward, forcing himself to remain still. Atsa stepped closer, circling him like an eagle evaluating prey. "You claim you saved our daughters because it was right." His eyes narrowed. "You claim life matters to you, even the life of an Apache." Caleb spoke quietly. "Yes, and you claim you nearly died doing it." "I did." Atsa suddenly thrust the staff against the earth beside Caleb's foot. The crack echoed like a gunshot. "Why? Why would a white rancher risk his life for women he has never met? Why would you not turn away and ride home?" Caleb lifted his chin, voice steady despite the fear clawing at his ribs. "Because I've lost too many people already," he said. "My father, my mother, my brother, all gone. I know what it feels like to be helpless. I know what it feels like when someone you care about is hurt and you can't do a damn thing." He paused. "If I rode away from your daughters that night, I would have had to live with it. And I couldn't." The circle went still. Not a horse shifted. Not a warrior breathed. Tayan bowed her head, her eyes suddenly burning. Nita sank to her knees inside the cabin, sobbing openly. Atsa studied Caleb's face with the depth of a man who had Judged thousands. Then the chief asked the question that mattered more than any other. When you saw my daughters lying in the snow, did you see enemies? Caleb shook his head. I saw people who needed help. Atsa's eyes flickered with something surprise, maybe even pain. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the staff. Turn your back, he commanded. A ripple of alarm shot through Tayan. No, she cried, struggling forward. Atsa, do not. The two warriors held her in place gently but firmly. Caleb hesitated but obeyed. He turned slowly, facing away from the chief, away from 700 warriors who could kill him before he took a single step. The wind rustled the feathers on the staff. Then Atsa gave the command that made every warrior tense. Ready to strike. Draw. The sound of weapons leaving their sheaths thundered across the plains. Spears lifted. Bows drew taut. For a heartbeat, Caleb thought this was it, that truth or not. The weight of old hatred would crush him. Tayan screamed his name. Nita let out a broken sob. Atsa raised the staff and slammed it into the earth. E-N-O-U-G. The weapons froze mid-air. Atsa's next words rode across the plains with the force of a decree, carved into stone. This man speaks truth. Warriors glanced at each other, shocked. Stunned, unsure, Atsa stepped beside Caleb, placing a massive hand on his shoulder. This man, he declared, saved the lives of my daughters. He brought them warmth when the night tried to steal them. He fought death itself, not for reward, not for glory, but because it was right. He turned so all 700 could see his face. For this, he will not die. The shock in the circle turned into relief, some reluctant, some genuine. Several warriors tapped their chests in respect. Others bowed their heads. A few still scowled, struggling to accept what they had just witnessed, but the chief was not done. Atsa pointed the staff toward the cabin. Bring Nita. Warriors rushed forward, not aggressively, but with reverence. They helped Nita from the cabin, supporting her as she limped across the yard. Tayan followed as best she could, refusing assistance despite the pain. Caleb moved to steady her, but she shook her head. She wanted to stand on her own. The sisters faced their father, towering over the warriors around them, weakened but proud. Atsa cupped Tayan's face. Then Nita's relief softening the stern lines of his features. You live. He whispered. They bowed their foreheads to his dot. Then Atsa turned back to Caleb. Because you saved my daughters, he said. I owe you a debt that cannot be measured. Caleb felt his stomach twist. I didn't do it for payment. I know, Atsa said firmly. Which is why the gift will be greater. He lifted the staff high. From this day forward, he proclaimed, his voice booming across the plains, Caleb Hunter is under the protection of the Red Mesa people. Any man who harms him harms the daughters of Atsa, his ranch, his cattle, his land. His life, all are guarded by our warriors. A stunned silence followed. Not even Tayan had expected this. Atsa lowered the staff and held Caleb's gaze with rare warmth. You saved my blood, the chief said. Now my blood protects you. Caleb bowed his head, overwhelmed. Tayan stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. Your life is tied to ours now, Caleb Hunter. Nita gave him a faint, grateful smile. And we do not forget those we owe. The tension that had threatened to drown the ranch evaporated, replaced by the strange, profound bond that had formed between one lone rancher and an entire nation of warriors. The sun climbed higher as the Tiafaj the formed between one lone rancher and an entire nation of warriors. The sun climbed higher as the Vadin Apache began to break the circle. Horses turned. Feathers fluttered in the wind. The war party melted across the plains, leaving behind only Atsa, Tayan, Nita, and the man who had changed everything by choosing compassion over fear. The sisters stood beside him, watching their people ride. Caleb felt something shift inside him, something warm, strange, and permanent. Tayan looked at him with deep, unreadable eyes. "You saved us," she murmured. "Now we walk this path together." And for the first time in years, Caleb felt that he wasn't alone anymore.